This was not an ego thing. This is a test for you guys. I've got a real mic hooked up to all this, and I muted this mic so that this thing wasn't overloading. And you guys tell me how that sounded. Now, that was the 335 with that 63 non-reverb deluxe. It sounds so cool. Though I'm using the speaker in my cab because the speaker in it needs a little bit of help. We're going to get to that. That was with the Royer. And I've made one. I'm making some pedals to use on the channel. Here's one in progress. This would be completed already, but one of the pots arrived broken. Always fun. So that was a well-known 4-knob circuit. And because the amp doesn't have any reverb, I put a little bit of flashback kind of room simulation slapback a la Jimmy Page or Robin Ford. Though my playing was not Jimmy Page or Robin Ford certified. But I want to be able to show you guys how amps react to pedals. So I'm making kind of my version of a lot of very common beloved pedals. I've had offers from various companies to send me pedals and all that, and I respect all these companies, but you know, I don't want to get something in and I'm like, they sent it, but I don't like it. Do I use it? Do I not use it? It gets a whole Seinfeld episode situation there. So I've decided to roll my own. There's so much nonsense about pedals out there in the world. I mean, my God, people will tell you all kinds of craziness. You know, like this pedal makes you sound like a Dumble. This is, you know, comparing 4 Dumble pedals. No Dumble pedal will make you sound like a Dumble. I think what they mean is that Robin Ford sounds like Robin Ford when he's using a Zen drive into a backline twin, and they think that's the sound of Dumble. No, that's the sound of Robin Ford, and you playing his Dumble, you're still going to sound like you. But with all respect to Howard Alexander, there are things about the Dumble which are great and unique, and you cannot do them. You cannot get there from here with a pedal in front of a different amp. The preamp in the Dumble, the clean preamp, is part of the overdriven sound, and then he puts that overdrive after the clean, so he's starting from a very different point than what comes out of your guitar. And you know, the only thing I would say that might get you there of the things marketed as being a Dumble, some of the ethos things where you use it as a preamp in place of the preamp of an amplifier, and some of the Kingsley tube pedals might be able to get there, but none of the basic op-amp clipping with diodes things out there will get you to Dumble world in a box. But you can find things which work for you musically. As far as pedal recommendations go, like I said, most of it's bullshit. The guys I would look to, I'd point you to, would be sorry, I'm spacing their names. David Barber has some really excellent information out there. And Doug Wampler, sorry, not Doug, Brian Wampler. Brian Wampler has fantastic information, real straight shooter, shows you all the stuff, the good and the bad. Josh from JHS, it's a little bit tough unless you already know, and I mean this with all respect, Josh, if you see this or someone says I said this, I think his sense of humor kind of intrudes sometimes to the point where he just can't help himself. He has to do something funny as opposed to just giving it straight. And I think that there's room for that as well, and he knows his shit. But I think sometimes he's joshing us a little bit. Anyway, let me get to some of the questions from everyone else. But I definitely wanted to kind of show that, and I'll be watching this back and making sure that the guitar sounds on playback what I want it to sound like for you guys, so that if I play a guitar and amp in a live format for you, I know that you're going to hear what I want you to hear, by which I mean you're going to hear what it sounds like. All right, let's see if I missed any, because the first questions left before the stream starts sometimes don't pop up. They're all popping up, but they pop up in different orders. It's weird. So I'm going to do the questions in the order that they show up on my screen here, which is not initially the order that they were asked, but we'll catch up pretty quickly. Hope everyone's having a good week. Hope everyone's going to have a good weekend. Here in the United States, at least, we have a long weekend, which is a wonderful thing. Let's see. We're going to start with Antonio Monteroso. I am doing great. Thank you very much. Hope you're doing well as well, Antonio. He's installed 4 F&T caps instead of the original Mallory can cap in a silver-faced Princeton. Any drawbacks? Would I remove the original can cap? I would leave the original can cap in the amp, disconnected, but leave it in the amp, not just for cosmetics, but also so there's not a pretty large hole in the bottom of the chassis where someone can stick their finger up and say, what's this for? And zap. No drawbacks to using the F&Ts other than the versus the can cap. They're, in every way, they're a better capacitor. Would I remove the push-pull circuit out of the amp? Personally, I would remove the push-pull circuit from the amp, and I would rebuild that part of the board to be the stock Princeton circuit, Princeton reverb circuit. But you don't have to. You can also just say, Doc, it hurts when I do this. Don't do that. Just don't use the push-pull, which does sound dreadful. Let's see. Hey, Nick, Sarah, besides the obvious vibrato and reverb options, are there slight tonal differences between the normal and vibrato channels on Fender amps? If so, why? Thanks again. Yeah, there are, and they're for a couple of reasons. The output of the entire reverb circuit, vibrato channel, goes through a 100 nanofarad cap with 47 50K to ground. Where's that 100K there? 50K to ground. And then there's a mix resistor where it loses some gain because it's blended with the normal channel. So right there, it's going to have a certain amount of low end, whereas the output of the normal channel has got a 47 nanofarad with 220K, 220K, and then 50K, so about 500K to ground. So it's got a different cap, a different ground resistance, putting aside the voltage divider there. They have a slightly different amount of low end present there. I don't want to have the math in front of me. More importantly, the normal channel does not go through the reverb circuit, which adds a little bit of gain and also has a 10 picofarad cap across a 3.3 meg resistor, which gives a little bit more air to everything. On some models like the Deluxe Reverb, the vibrato channel will have a fixed bright cap, 47 picofarad, whereas the normal channel does not. On larger Fenders, both channels have that switched. So, and then the vibrato itself, that circuit takes a little bit of gain, tiny little bit of gain away from the vibrato channel's potential. It really ends up with them being in similar places, just with the vibrato channel, regardless of the presence of a bright cap, having a little more air, which in a non-serviced amp can also be a little bit of hiss, but we tend to live with that. And in some models, like the Pro Reverb and the Super Reverb, not the Pro, sorry, the Super Reverb, the vibrato channel has a variable mids pot, whereas the normal channel has a fixed mids resistor. So that's the other difference. But if you were to take that and turn it to about 8 on the mids knob on the vibrato channel, you'd have about the same mids as you'd have on the normal channel. There are more things, but they're esoteric. I did not see last night's Tone Talk. I saw that Dave was being punished with questions again, but occasionally I spend Friday nights with my wife rather than on YouTube doing the guitar thing. And last night was no exception. We were watching Endeavour, the British detective show set in the 60s in Oxford. Oxford seems a dreadfully ugly place. Cool. Well, Dave's got my number, and I am, if that's the case, I'm very honored. Hey, Louis Sherwin, he got a Tweaker 15, the Egnator. Those are really good if the power transformer doesn't die, though it's more prevalent on the 40 than the 15. He replaced the electro harmonics with some JJs. For the new J, what my suggestion for an ideal, what is PD? I don't know what an ideal PD is. in general, I only like the JJ6V6S's in heads because in combos they tend to go microphonic. But I don't know what you mean by PD, so if you can reply, I will look for that. And I'm trying to look at the current stuff down here, at the stuff in sequence up here, and it's a little bit push me, pull you. Let's see. Hey, Chris, there's the other question. If I'm going to be running, he's going to be running amps hot for an 8-hour day or two in a studio setting. Better leave them on, use standby, turn them off between takes. It's going to depend on the amp. The main enemy of tube life, besides something being wrong in the amp, is thermal changes, massive thermal changes. So if you're going to be leaving that off for more than 30 minutes, not using it for more than 30 minutes, put it in standby if it has the option. That'll keep the tubes running warm and everything be warm, but you won't be running any real current. It's that transition from a cold amp to a hot amp, that can stress things out, and it really stresses the switches. Actually, using a standby switch will stress that switch, but you'll probably be okay. They tend to last many decades. And there's also the fact that amps tend to sound better when they've been on for a while. So you probably don't want to power them off and turn them back on and try to get a take. But if they've been running for a while, they're going to sound more consistent typically. Okay, Lewis replied down here. PD stands for plate dissipation, currently running at 9.7 watts. Well, it's going to depend on, I don't remember if that amp does cathode bias or fixed bias. Cathode bias, you want 6V6s to be biased at about 100 to 120% idle dissipation. If you want them running in fixed bias, you're going to want them to be running between 50 and 70% plate dissipation. So the JJ6V6S is a 14-watt tube. So if that's a fixed bias amp, I think it is, you would be wanting to run those between 7 and 9 watts typically. I don't have the math in front of me. Whatever, 70% of 14 is as high as you'd want to go, and really 40% of 14 is as low as you'd want to go for fixed bias. For cathode bias, you want those to be running about 14 to 15.5 watts idle dissipation. Okay, it's cathode bias. It's got a 510 ohm. Okay, yeah. Well, then do the math. Measure. There are lots of websites out there. Weber used to have as in Weber speakers, used to have a fantastic bias calculator for this. I think it's no longer functioning properly. I have my own, but the one that Rob Robinette has up on his site is actually quite good, and all you have to do is know the actual resistance of that resistor when no voltage is present, when the amp is off, and then you need to know the voltage from the plate to the cathode on the tube, and the plate, the voltage from the cathode to ground on that tube, and then you need to know what the maximum wattage rating of the tube is. In your case, with the JJ6V6S, it's 14 watts. Let's see. Hey, Daniel. Yeah, it sounds like you might have DC. Well, if you have static sounds as you move a pot, typically that's going to be an indication you have DC where there should not be DC. In an amplifier, that's often the case. In a pedal, especially if it's happening through multiple things, I can see it happening in your amps, but not your Dream 65, or your Dream 65, but not your amps. You may have a problem with the power in your house, but that's getting into the realm of things where I would have to have your devices here in front of me. And the first thing I tell you is try it in a different location and see if your problems stay with, stay, or whether you left them at home with the previous power situation. You may just have a bad connection in a cable, but you've swapped your cables. That's where troubleshooting gets difficult, and it's difficult to do long range from here. I don't know how many pedals you're using, but start with a guitar into amp, then introduce one pedal at a time when possible. Let's see here. Hey, Fuzz Mountain, I appreciate that. That's very kind of you to say. And if Dave wants to send me some Fenders, he knows where to find me. Speaking of Fenders finding me, let me tell you why I was almost late to the stream and a little bit just getting out of panic mode. So a client bought a 64 Super Reverb and had it shipped to me from I think from Chicago. It's supposed to arrive yesterday between 1 and 5 p.m. I stayed home all day waiting for this thing. I was unable to take another client's amp to FedEx to ship it out yesterday because I was stuck home waiting for the big brown truck. Didn't show. This morning I texted the client to say, hey, it didn't show up today. Let me know if it's going to be redelivered today or Tuesday. He said, well, they show it as being delivered. Well, it wasn't delivered here. Where was it delivered to? So turns out, very nice, good happy ending. About 5 minutes before the stream started, he found out from UPS that they got my house number off by 1. They had a dyslexic driver or something. So it's 2 houses down, and I know that the people who live there, they're very nice. They're not home right now, so I'm sure that it's just in the living room or something. So after the stream today, I'm going to go knock on their door again. So everyone involved has got a big whew. But I've had UPS do the same thing, only transpose numbers and zip codes and stuff, or deliver to the same street name in a different city. Always something, right? Pardon me. Hey, Tanner McCage, I'll check the emails. Sorry, I get behind on emails. I get so many of them, especially as the channel grows. I get so many more spam things and so many crappy companies wanting to send me things to feature on the channel for you guys. Like the most recent one that I remember deleting yesterday was some electric floor lamp. An electric floor lamp. I don't need to sell you guys floor lamps. And if I did, I'd say go to, Graham's Lighting here in Memphis or some other actual lighting store. Send you to Ethan Allen, something worth having. Because if you're going to just spend something cheap, just go to Target or IKEA. And you don't need my advice on how to get cheap things that last 6 months. Let's see. Thanks, Jeff Squires. I love that 335. There's a lot of gear flexing on YouTube and on guitar channels, especially when you see the guitar channels where the guys have like 37 PRSs, and you know that a lot of them got that stuff. And I'm not calling out anyone. This is not about you, Leon Todd, for example. I know that you paid for those, and if you want to have 37 PRSs with flame tops, you're absolutely allowed to because you're a fantastic player. And it's, Jeff McElwain, as one comes in, another one goes out typically, so he has some really nice things. Zach Child's my buddy ass Zach. He's got that 56 Esquire. All these guys deserve it, but there are guys on these guitar channels who just have walls and walls of guitars. I wanted a guitar, I wanted a 345, and I waited decades and decades, and this one came along, and it was a good one. And a lot of 335s are pieces of, just bowling balls with strings. They're not good guitars. This is a really good one. And it belonged to a friend of mine who was able to work out a pay as you can when you can thing for me, which I honored, and I paid it off in like 3 months. But he brought this by to see if I was interested, and I'm like, yeah, that Les Paul is getting sold today. And that'll be your deposit, and then I will be giving you pretty much every spare dime I have until this is paid for, and I paid for that in like 3 months, and it was a huge sacrifice, but sometimes you just know this is the one. Buy this. It's not a Murphy Labs, it's not original, it's not insanely expensive, but it was enough that I had to sell practically brand new Les Paul standard, and then come up with some other money. So for me, it was very expensive, but that's the only that. Well, I guess the Southern Jumbo I have is expensive now, but those are the only two guitars that I could not afford to replace fairly easily if I had to. Everyone's saying hello. I'm glad people are liking the sound of that. I can't wait to hear it back on playback. I did do a test stream this morning to make sure it's going to be in the ballpark, but I never know how it's going to really come across. And I play much better when no one's listening, which is a bad situation for a guy who plays in public, so to speak. On a new deluxe Reverb power transformer, how much mechanical hum would I accept? None. As in, you put your ear to it and you're hearing it. It's one thing if you have an output transformer and you can hear it as you play if you have your ear up to it. But the power transformer, no. I'd want it to be pretty much exactly acoustically null. Hey, Jeff Harper. I don't have any thoughts on the quilters. I have not had any experience with them. I think I've played one once. I'm not sure which model it was. It was at a music store, and someone said, "Hey, everyone's liking these as to carry as backups for their gigs." And I played it, and I thought, well, yeah, I can see that. It's better than nothing. But this was a decade plus ago. I'm sure they've gotten better, but I was unimpressed. And given what I do and how many amps are here at all times, I just didn't see the need to have a solid state thing that I would not love. But I might be going down that road a little bit. I'll talk about that after the first break. But I have no experience with the quilters. I hope they're great. Yeah, exactly, Marley. Robin Ford using my 2-rock sounding like Robin Ford. Yeah. Hey, Sebastian, I don't remember the phase flip on the back. I'm sure what they do on that is just I don't remember that being a switch that I looked at. Everything else about that I remember about the amp. But imagine, so if you're running, say, that and a twin in an ABY configuration, and you want them both at the same time, if the output of the amp, because every stage in an amp inverts, and so if an amp has 3 gain stages and the next amp has 2 gain stages in series, then the signals, if the same input signal goes to both amps, the output will be out of phase on one of them compared to the other. And so if you do that kind of thing, you can say, well, I'm just going to invert the polarity of the speakers in this matchless so that it'll be pushing at the same time my Fender speakers are pushing. And it's easy to do, and especially in a matchless or other amp which does not have negative feedback, because then you can flip the polarity at the output with impunity. That's fun to say. Flip the polarity with impunity. Let's all say that together. Oh, no, let's not. Sorry, I've been watching Kids in the Hall again. Terriers are my favorite kind of breed. Yeah, I think Doug, Brian, I want to keep saying Doug Wampler. That's weird. I know why. My friend Doug Womble. If anyone loves jazz and blues and slide guitar and a great singer, check out Doug Womble. He's a New York, Brooklyn-based god of a man and a player. Plays at Bar 55 a lot if you're in Manhattan. Phenomenal musician. Anyway, Doug Womple. That's why I keep wanting to say make Brian Wampler into Doug Wampler. Womple and Wampler, and Luke Skywalker is trembling hearing this. Anyway, yeah, Brian knows his stuff. Let's see. Hey, Chris Sambuco, I don't think you really need to play around with the reverb too much. Dwell and tone controls. Dwell as implemented in an existing 763 doesn't really do that much compared to what it does in the reverb unit. And I've got the reverb unit in the other room I can hook up for you guys over the break if you want. Tone circuit. I guess you could. But the only thing I would play around with would be typically if you want warmer reverb, you can just there's a on the silver face units they added a 2.2 nanofarad 2200 picofarad cap from the RCA plug to ground. You could add another one in parallel to that if you wanted to shave off some highs there, or you can just change out to a current production mod tank. That'll warm it the hell up. I wouldn't go too crazy because odds are someone else likes it the way it was, and if you modify it, you may never be happy, but you can't get back to where other people will be happy very easily. Thanks, Curtis. Remember, people, the super stickers, I don't see them here because they're they're only on YouTube, and I'm not watching the chat in YouTube. I'm using a third-party app. So I got Pear Character doing a shaka sign with his hand saying cool. And I don't know what that means, but I appreciate the $2 pair. Let's see. Hey, Lenny's. If a rectifier tube fails short, it's not really dangerous as long as you have the right mains fuse. That the mains fuse did exactly what it's supposed to do. If you have concerns about it, you can put some 1N4007 diodes in series before the rectifier tube. So if the rectifier HTs are coming in on pins 4 and 6, you would move those wires to pins 3 and 5, and then put diodes going from 3 to 4 and 5 to 6 with the diode band facing towards pins 4 and 6, not towards 3 and 5. And that way, when if there is a problem in the rectifier tube, those diodes will kind of be in between the rectifier tube and the power transformer. But it's usually not a danger to the power transformer or to anything else. Hey, Clyde, do I have a favorite Jazzmaster pickup? Whatever the hell Elvis Costello's got, which I assume is just like a 1964 Jazzmaster pickup with a ton of sweat in it. I am going to get technical difficulties resuming. I've been doing that once a month, and I had my own technical difficulties off camera, off stage, and it's kind of gone to the wayside. I'm going to get that back. But I had been talking to Mike Adams, Pusheen, speaking of Jazzmasters, and I want to have him on the channel at some point, but he's apparently finishing up a degree, and his entire channel and YouTube thing is sidelined. But almost everything in depth I know about Jazzmasters, I know from his Pusheen channel. So I think he likes, there's a lot that he likes, but the ones he prefers are by a builder whose name escapes me at the moment. So check out Pusheen, Puisheen, if you're into Jazzmasters, and just go with his recommendations because he knows the stuff. And he's a really nice guy. And I hope that when he gets to finish with his schooling, he still keeps his toes in this world and will still speak to us little mortals down here in guitar YouTube hell. Hey, Martin, I never worry about where the amp volume is when I turn it on, unless it's an amp that I know has a pop that's affected by the master volume. There are some channel changing apps that you will forget that, oh, I turned it, I'm playing on the clean channel, and I turned the master for that channel down, and I'm playing that power the amp off, and I forgot that I had the master volume for the dirty channel cranked, and at the moment you power the amp off, it defaults back to the relay non-energizes, and so you get the crank master volume for a second. So there are exceptions, but in general, I don't worry about the volume controls of an amp when powering on or off, not in terms of safety to the amp, just in terms of annoyance to my ears. Hey, Captain Grumpus, yeah, all the nuts and screws are... Curtis Novak, thank you. Yeah, Jazzmaster. Curtis Novak pickups are the ones that that Mike likes so much. Sorry, back to you, Captain Grumpus. Yeah, all the hardware tends to be loose on the Fender reissues. They're good amps overall. Here's a twin Reverb reissue that's been probably from the early 90s. It's going very strong. It's had some service. You'll see this on the channel tomorrow, but it's still going well. The Reverb's a bit anemic. Any way to give it a little more oomph? You could have a bad tank. They're using the Belton branded tanks in there, which tend not to be that fantastic. If it's that, the tank's under warranty. Or you can go with a third-party tank. I particularly like the ones that Mojotone sells. It could also just be a bad or rather weak either driver tube or recovery tube. So in a Princeton Reverb, the driver tube is V2. It's the second one from the right. It's a 12AT7. That one could be weak. Or a V3, which is the third from the right, that's a Reverb recovery tube. That's a 12AX7. That could have a weak triode. So those are the places. If someone's brought in their Princeton on my bench and said, hey, Reverb's weak, before I even opened it up, I would try different AT, different AX, different tank. And if the Reverb is still weak, then I think electronics. Otherwise, I think tubes or tank. So that's how you start, and especially if it's under warranty. Now, a note to everyone, and I'm not singling you out, Captain Grumpus, or anyone in particular, but I see people in the comments on my videos say, hey, I had to get 3. You know, I bought this amp of different brands. I bought this amp from Guitar Center or Sweetwater or whoever, and it made this weird noise. So I sent the amp back, and they sent me another one. And the second one made a different weird noise. So I sent it back, and they sent me another one. And the third one stayed, you know, but the second one burned down, fell over, and sank into the swamp. I feel bad for the amp companies involved, and I feel bad for the companies like Sweetwater or the brick and mortar stores trying to support these people by sending out all these amps and eating all these shipping costs. In each one of these cases, it's probably just a bad tube, probably just a cheap tube that shipped from the factory in China or Vietnam or Mexico to a warehouse somewhere, and then to a different warehouse, and then to this person's house, and it was never a great tube to begin with because you get what you pay for. And so you keep shipping amps back and forth, and amps go from brand new to used but very good condition. People take hits, all because of $20, $30 tubes. Educate yourself. If you're going to buy a tube amp, learn how to say, hey, I'm going to always have at least a couple of spare 12AX7s on hand before I assume that something's really wrong. You know, you tighten up the output jacks on a deluxe Reverb issue and say, hey, V4 is weak. Can we change that out? Oh, wow, this amp sounds great. As opposed to, this thing's bad. I'm sending it back. I'm getting another one. I know. But I mean, I've been in customer support, and there's people you cannot make happy. And there are people who would be happy if they knew just a little bit more. So, but if they call up, say, Sweetwater, and Sweetwater say, well, have you tried changing tubes? They're going to say, yeah, no. I bought this thing. You just take care of it. People are all out to win these days. Everything's an argument. Everything's a chance to win or lose. Sorry, I'm grumpy today. I don't know why. I shouldn't be. Anyway, let me get off my low horse. Timothy Dorcas says, from a tone perspective, is it better to get a more powerful amp and get an attenuator, or get an amp with less wattage? Looking at 100 watt versus 20 watts steel strings. I can never remember what it is. Is it Stinger, Swinger, Singer? Anyway, the Dumble thing. Well, in general, I'm going to tell you two conflicting things. In general, an amp sounds better without an attenuator, and an amp sounds better working towards its capability. So in general, a 20 watt amp without attenuation is going to sound better than a 100 watt amp with attenuation. The caveat to that is you cannot make a 20 watt steel string whatever, the Dumble thing. That circuit doesn't work with 20 watts. That's got to be at least 80 watts to do its thing. You know, there's certain things They are what they is, you know. But there are many circuits which can be done at 20 and 15 watts, and they're going to sound great. But the high watt, the Marshall Super, you've got to have that output section working. And attenuation in general is best if you, unless you're doing the full thing where it's all going to a reactive load and IRs and all that, you know, the aux box or whatever. In general, if you can do a combination of small amounts of attenuation for different devices, say you have a master volume that you run at 2 o'clock, and you have a speaker attenuator that you run -6 dB. So neither one is doing a huge amount of attenuation, so neither one is adding much coloration to the tone versus doing it all with one. That's not a hard and fast rule. It's going to vary depending on the quality of each device and the line. You know, but so I can't tell you what to get. If you really want the sound of the steel string swinger, stinger, singer, whatever it is, you need that big wattage thing, and it's heavy and it's expensive, and that's what does that sound. Hey, Lenny's Brown Tooth, I answered my question about your question about backup diodes on the rectifier socket about 5-10 minutes ago, because yes, I like them, and I advise people to install them. I won't necessarily install them in every vintage amp, but in every amp which is not vintage, which is gigging, I put them in if they're not already there. Hey, Josh, I don't have a favorite pedal platform amplifier because I don't understand the concept. Every amp can be a pedal platform. There are amps which are poor pairings with certain pedals, which is another fun thing to say. For instance, if you've got a tweed champ with no headroom and you turn it up and then you run a big muff into it, it's going to sound like an electric fart. But there are other pedals that would work really well into that little tweed champ, even if it was cranked. And there are a lot of really good sounding amps that will make surprising good pairings. It depends on what you want to do. If you want to have just like this clean blank canvas, and then you have all these crayons on a pedal board and get all your drive and all your tones from that, then you really want a high watt or a twin, maybe even one of the ultra linear late 70s that you can get for much cheaper these days. But you know, this deluxe here, the volume is on 3. Let's see. Let me mute my voice. I forgot I had had to mute my voice mic. Sorry about that. I'm still getting used to this new setup. That was breaking up at 3 on this deluxe. I almost said deluxe reverb on this deluxe. So that is useless for a lot of pedal platform guys. A 335 going into a deluxe at 3 is supposed to break up like that. You can't hear me now? Can you hear me now? Talk, talk, talk. It says you can hear me now. I'm going to go forward thinking that you can hear me. All right, cool. So if that deluxe reverb on 3 with the 335 that breaks up just without anything else, if that's not your ideal thing, what world are you living in? Because that is as loud as I ever need to be in this room that's like 15 by 20. That's gig level for most stages these days. But as I tried to say, with the mic muted, if I switched to the Strat or the Tele, or just turn down the volume on the guitar, it would be nice and clean. But it has a lot of mids. It's. I think the problem that I see when I see the forums and I see all these videos about pedal platforms is that people expect. People have grown up playing pods and modelers and stuff, and they expect that total clean slate exists in some acoustic realm. And it only does if you have very high headroom amps, which tend to be more expensive and louder than you can get away with. I guess if I were to take the question at face value and not argue with it, I would say the Cerebella is probably the best thing on the market for that, because it was designed to be a good sounding, not blank slate. It has its own character, but the character that it has is kind of ready to go in any direction you want. That said, again, when people talk about pedal platforms, I've got the treble on that normal channel at 7.5 and the bass at 4. And it still has a lot of low end with the 335, and it's not ultra mega bright with the 335. If I change to the Tele, which I'll do at the next break, I'll want to turn the treble down and the bass up. But the low end that sounds good at clean when you're straight end can be way too much low end if you hit an overdrive pedal. And people grow up thinking with their modelers that they will just change the amp model at the same time. You got to change all these things at once. And so if you choose a pedal to go with X amp, you need to make sure that, hey, if I'm going for this particular kind of sound at higher gain, I need to be able to control the low end of that, either with the amp or in the pedal, or maybe I need to look at stacking an EQ with that. It gets complicated. So I'm not shitting on you for asking the question here. It's not a dumb question. It's a very common question, but I think it's ignoring the fact that a lot of the mistakes out there as far as pairing pedals and amps are what gave people their careers. Brian May certainly has done a lot of wrong things in his gear setup over the years. So is the Edge. So is Jimmy Page. Tends to work for them. Hey, Craig, you just changed the tubes, cold start, slight crackle when it's warming up. That could be one of the tubes. It could be a problem with a solder joint. There's no way of telling from here. The best way to do it is to power it up. Pull V1, power it on. Does it still make a crackle? Pull V3, power it on. Does it still make a crackle? Do that. If it still crackles without the preamp tubes, there's nothing wrong with the preamp. Then try a different pair of 6v6s. If you still have the old tubes, crackle goes away, you got a problem with the new tubes. But if it works fine, once it's warmed up, then it works fine. Don't worry about it too much. Hey, hand-wired amps. Yeah, fiber boards with DC. I've had some that are really stubborn. And as you will see in some of my videos, I will often remove the backer board. I will take the bottom board, insulator board, out of the amp, and I'll practically soak that in isopropyl and get any wax off of it. Sometimes there'll be wax on the bottom of the top board. That can be really difficult. And sometimes, like, you'll have stuff embedded in seemingly deep in the fibers. I've only had to replace one. That was one that actually had some burning, which is rare. I've taken some where I've taken almost everything out of I've taken all the caps off and taken it out in my driveway and used brake cleaner fluid, brake cleaner spray. Then after that's done, I put the caps back on because it'll melt the plastic bodies on those caps. But that was one I probably, in retrospect, would have replaced. But I rarely replace the fiber boards because usually I can clean them up enough. But sometimes it takes more effort. What I hate is when you get a Marshall board that's got that funk in it, because on a Marshall, the old Garolite boards, they'll actually physically burn sometimes, and that's heartbreaking when that happens. There's no cleaning that. Paul Watson, you're just fucking with me now, man. Don't get me on. Don't get me started. Maybe we'll do a chili show, and pasta sauce show one day. I'm trying to move on, but I want to answer. I'm not a big fan of sweetness in there, but I could see carrot and certain onions more than apple or pear. I don't want a fruity surprise in my chili. But anyway, I'll argue with you about that later. Oh, let's see. Here's a tough one. What advice can I give for desoldering a double-sided through-hole plated PCB? Sometimes it ends up with the pads clean, but solder clogging the insides. What I've often found is that the solder that's clogging the holes is the lead-free stuff that it came in with. And you get all off the pads, but the lead-free is down in the hole, and how do you wick that out? And you can't heat it up enough for the solder sucker to do anything. It's just in there. The first thing I will try, and this usually works fine, is I will add fresh solder to one of the pads, and that kind of builds up and touches the old solder, and then I'll either wick or use the sucker to get that fresh solder off. And most of the time, 99% of the time, it'll take the old solder with it. It'll just bond to the old solder, mix up. And it just when you add the new, say that the surface layer of the board is here and the old solder in the hole is here just below it, by adding that solder, it pools on top, but also reaches down and bonds with the old solder. And so when you heat up that new solder and you remove it, it usually takes the old solder away with it. The other thing I'll do, if necessary, is I will take a spare resistor lead, and I'll put it in the hole, and I'll heat it up, and I'll poke it through, and it kind of pushes all the solder through with it, and just do that, push it down and wick it off, and pull it up and wick it off. There are ways, but you got to be careful. You got to do this kind of thing fast, because if you overheat it, all the pads can lift. It's not fun. Purpose of grid stopper and screen resistors on power tubes. Example. Boba Fett, that's a good question, but it's beyond the scope of a chat like this, because I would have to have diagrams. Go to the valvewizard.co.uk. Merlin Blenco's quite excellent site. He has some chapters which explain these things. He has books on preamp design which really explain these things, and there are some books, the Ultimate Tone series by Kevin O'Connell, that also get into this. In general, both of them limit the current available. In the case of a grid stopper, it will not only limit the current, but it can also block RFI and noise at the input. It can make the input of the tube run in a more stable fashion. You can also sculpt how much high end is rolled off due to the Miller effect when you know the capacitance of the tube. And with this, if I increase from no grid stopper to 1.5K to 10K to 47K to 100K, but to show you and explain all these things on here without charts prepared, I just end up confusing everyone. And this information is out there. Uncle Doug's probably got this too. I think he's got a really thorough section on how power tubes work. So Uncle Doug, the Valve Wizard, and Kevin O'Connor are good places to start. Not to mention all the various books and manuals written on this subject over the decades. Greetings from Hamburg. Hello, Gorilla Groby. Let's see. Kyle Driscoll Music. Do I have a preferred type of resistor for the audio path of an amp? Doesn't make much of a difference. it can make a difference in certain parts of the circuit. I've spoken about this in old Fenders where there are certain resistors where it matters and certain resistors where it does not. If in general, I look at it two ways. If I'm rebuilding a 60s Fender and Leo used carbon composites, for every place where he used a carbon comp where it was not a mistake, for instance, in the bias supply and the power in the doghouse, those are not good places for those carbon comps to be used. I will use a carbon comp so long as I can get them. Now, they are no longer in production by most companies, and we have an unknown remaining stock in the world. So I will probably stop using them on 70s Fenders. I will probably start being more selective and talking to the owner about, hey, do you want to pay extra to keep as much originality as possible, or are you okay with saying, all right, well, let's definitely do that on that plate, but the cathode can go to carbon film. Most Marshalls always use carbon films. Some of the earlier Marshalls have some carbon comps, and in a restoration, I will talk to the owners about that. But in general, most Marshalls use carbon comps. Vox used really terrible carbon composites, and so carbon film is the way to go. Did I just say Marshall mostly use carbon comps? Marshall, you mostly use carbon film, sorry. And so on those Voxes with those terrible, eerie carbon comps, I will almost always convince the owner to let me change them out for carbon composites, which Vox also used during the 60s, and much like Marshall, and they sound quite good. I don't find that there's any difference in sound between, say, a Pyre or Iskra carbon film resistor in a Marshall and some other good quality, say, Coaspire carbon film in a Marshall. But if someone wants to pay me to source out an Iskra or Pyre, I'll be glad to. They do look the part. But in general, I like carbon film for everything. I will use carbon comp as appropriate when needed. There are places I like metal films very much. In a high gain amp, a very high gain amp, more so than a Marshall, by which I mean more so than say a super lead or lead, I will use a Vichy metal film quite happily. There are places in the power section, you can see my videos where I use a mixture of metal oxides and wire wounds. Always the right component for the part, for the job when possible. I don't tend to like the sound of amplifiers built with a whole bunch of metal films everywhere. I think that the carbon film does have some of the benefits as far as asymmetrical distortion and clipping that carbon composites can definitely have. But the carbon films also have a lower noise floor, so they're kind of the best of all worlds. They have an interesting sound, but a quiet, reliable sound, and you can actually have spec sheets, and they're very widely available, and they're inexpensive. So carbon films are my preference for most amps. I think we're going to take our first 7-minute break pretty soon. Let's get past JoJo's, I think, first. Get some. I have off the top of my head, PW. I don't remember what a 6x4 WA is. So you just have to Google that. Sorry, I don't know. Hal Hawkins is on the way with a 65. Yeah, his 65 Deluxe just burned out or is in the process of burning out a new tube. I got to talk to the vendor and see what's going on, because that's the second pair of tubes I've put in that amp in 6 months, and everything in the amp is 1,000% healthy. We're just having problems with current production tubes. Let's see. Hey, if it's been in storage for 20 years, Count Domingo, don't power it on at all. Take it to a tech. If that amp came into me, I would probably not even power it on unless I was, I'd want to visually inspect it first. And after that, if I powered it on, I powered on with the variac and a current limiter and monitoring the current and bring it up very slowly over a period of time to make sure that nothing explodes. A brown box does not have enough low enough of a voltage setting to give you any protection, and there'd be no current protection. Take it to a tech. If you got a 68 bandmaster, it's worth spending $150 to make sure it's safe. Sorry, I don't mean to sound antagonistic. Thanks, Jojo. Appreciate that. What speakers for a 2x10 cab for a 68 bandmaster? And thank you for the kind words. It's always tough recommending speakers for people because everyone has different subjective experiences and expectations and preferences. So I can tell you that any speaker I recommend is based primarily on, I know that, well, not primarily, but primarily it's tonal, but I'm not going to tell you something that's cheap as in bad quality. I want something that's going to deliver a reliable, long-term option for you. For a bandmaster, there are two choices that a lot of my clients have been very happy with, which would be the G10C and the ET10 from Warehouse Guitar Speakers. These are inexpensive. You could get some Celestion Alnico Gold 10s. There's a lot of money you can spend on this. And there's some other good options that I don't like as well myself, like the Eminence Little Buddy and Legends series, but they're also quite good. But most of my clients that I've steered towards these two speakers have really liked them. The G10C is a 10-inch version of the Jensen C12N. So it's kind of the ultimate Fender semi-mid-scooped clean sound. And the ET10 is a 10-inch version of the ET65, which is based on the G1265 from Celestion, a British speaker. Speakers don't know where they're from. And none of the speakers that are British speakers are actually from Britain these days. It's interesting. But except for a few remaining Celestions. But basically what I tell clients is if you want to sound like Stevie Ray clean, go with the G10Cs. If you want to sound like Robin Ford, for that kind of Fender clean or Dumble clean, go to the ET10s. One or both of those will make you very happy. You won't go wrong with those, and they have some other good choices. The Retro 10's nice, but I think those are the two that I would put with the Bandmaster for the most part. We're going to take our first. No, Victor's here, so I'm going to take off, guys. We're going to do our first of 2 7-minute intermissions. Everyone can get a new drink, new cup of coffee, grab a sandwich, whatever you need to do, and I'll see everyone back in 7 minutes. All right, we're gonna try the telly at those same settings and that fender that we had, the 335, and I predict it's gonna be a little bit bright. Let's see what you think. That works too. It's nice when the same pedal works with multiple guitars. There's a little bit of a thing happening with that pedal, a little bit more gain than that. I'm going to be changing. It's a little bit asymmetrical distortion I introduced, and I think I went a little too asymmetrical in that it's got some MOSFETs and some BAT 41s. Is that what it is? I can't remember the model name. And then it's got one in 94A, and that one in 94A had a forward voltage drop of only 200 milliamps, which is low, even for an old germanium. And I think it's just a little bit too low. So I think I'm going to be tweaking the value of that. Asymmetrical is difficult. I love the sound of LED clipping in these things too, but I think in this circuit, the whole thing would get too loud and bright if I did that. It's always fun playing with these things though. I might be crazy and put a switch in it later and give me some options. I just don't like to have option paralysis. I like to say this pedal does this and this pedal does that, and they're easy to make. And I mean, so much of the marketing today is just a paint job, and I very deliberately chose just to go with plain Hammond boxes. I'm not even going to do anything to them. You know, just they're going to be boxes, and they're going to have knobs and switches and jacks. Not even going to have any writing on them. I'll know what they do. Anyway, let's get on to the next questions. Hey, Jeff, I want to ask, do power tubes really make a difference in the sound of an amp? Yeah, they do as far as tube type. They don't always make as big a difference as people think. If I were to play the same amp into 34s versus 6L6s without telling anyone, and I had them, you know, a blind test, you'd be hard-pressed with most circuits to tell which was which. Some really good players with a lot of experience would say, oh, that's the 6L6 because of XYZ. That's the EL34 because of XYZ, but they're not dramatically different. Even 34s to 6550s can be hard to tell the difference. I had that 86 rather, matchless, the one made in California. It's still here. I just haven't put it back in its cab yet. And that thing came in with KT77s, and KT77s are very expensive these days. And I talked to the owner, and we went with a pair of EL34s, and someone said, well, aren't you going to miss the extra output power of KT77s? It's a matchless 50 watt. With EL34s, it's already louder than you'll ever want to have in any space you're going to be in, unless you're playing in a freaking arena and you're 40 feet away on stage. The volume difference between KT77s and EL34s is just a matter of how quickly the tinnitus will kick in. But, you know, if your question's more about JJ versus EH versus whatever within a certain type, different brands, in the good old days when we had a wider selection and the quality was higher, it could matter a little bit. Now, just go with the one that's going to last the longest. And I'm having a lot of problems these days finding a 6v6 that doesn't die within 2-3 months. Thanks, TD. Appreciate that. Hey, Clyde. Speaking of Dumbles earlier, I think Fuchs and what do you call it? Seritone. I can't call it Cheeriotone. It sounds weird. Serotonin is probably one of the cheaper options. I would say Fuchs is where you start to get a known longevity, known quality. I would say Fuchs. Serotones, I have no experience of a bad transformer, but those transformers just physically do not instill any confidence in me. The rest of the amp builds are quite nice, but I would go Fuchs. Plus Andy really knows his shit, and he's in New Jersey, and you can call him. Hey, Giant Pinhead. Tinnitus style ringing when you plug an overdrive pedal into a 64-inch amp. Probably a microphonic tube or a ground which is less than ideal, and the extra gain reveals the problem the amp already has that the amp doesn't display when it's run more quietly with less gain. So I would probably try different preamp tubes first. This two of the preamp tubes in this 63 Deluxe are microphonic as well. They were fine on the bench, but I wouldn't put it in the cab with the speaker. And I heard them ringing out, and which I did not hear on the bench test, even though I tapped them, because the frequency that you tap a tube is different than how it vibrates when a speaker's playing. So it's got a speaker thing I want to check into. It may not be tight. I need to check that. There's a little paper fizzy thing in the low end on that speaker, and then the tubes are ringing. So that's another reason I've got it to my shop cab. We're not getting the ringing speakers, and I know that my speakers don't have problems. Yeah. Hey, Bottom Kitchen. Hey, I've read how the Deluxe Reverb is too loud for most home use, but I tried one, was able to play with volume at 5, lower input, it was fine, like 92 dB. Yeah, I would not Dremel the old tabs. I would just leave the old sorry, this is Antonio. Leave the old cap in place. Just don't have it connected inside. Sorry, back to you, Bottom Kitchen. Yeah, I mean, I've got a video showing how to use the Deluxe Reverb as a bedroom amp with no master volume. I just had the volume on like 2. Let's see. Tell me if you hear this. Turn the mic pre up for you. So right now it's right below 2. Dead center on the 2 on the volume pot. And if you can't practice at that level, something's wrong, And I've already had a whole bunch of distortion and delay and reverb pedals set up. I'd hear it. I'd be able to practice, for a bedroom amp, a practice amp. And then you turn it up to 4 and you go gig with it, It's not a... I don't understand why people think everything is so loud. And people think that a 5-watt amp is a lot quieter than a 20-watt amp. And it's not a lot. It's a little bit quieter. And you put this in your speaker, in your closet facing some blankets, it's even quieter. Make sure your tubes don't get overheated and blocked off. You want to have some airflow. But TD, oh good. If I've gotten perfect sound quality, I can stop the channel now. That's the entire point of why we're here. Princeton at some settings can be louder than a deluxe reverb at some settings. You know, I was going into input 1, not input 2. And a deluxe reverb is slightly louder on the vibrato channel than the vibrato only channel on the non-reverb deluxe here, just slightly. Thanks, Rob French. Appreciate that. I'm glad the oscillation stuff helped with the chat. Appreciate not oscillation, oscilloscope. Sorry, I read that as oscillation because I speed read. I cheat. Yes, people have often criticized me on the internet for not using a scope. I just don't find a scope to be a good demonstration tool most of the time. Sometimes it is, like when I showed on a Friedman, where we're losing level, or where I want to, if I have an amp that comes in with which I'm unfamiliar, I need to know how loud it should be. I can say, oh yeah, it's putting out 15.7 watts. That's what it should do. Or why is it only putting out 8 watts? I'm looking at this, I should be getting closer to 20. But most of the time with old Fenders and Marshalls and Voxes, I can tell just by the sound what's going on. In that case, on that champ, I knew I was losing low end somewhere. Wasn't sure where. I mean, I was pretty sure it was just going to be the output transformer. But I wanted to show you, guys, how that thought process works. Thanks, Bottom Kitchen. Appreciate that. Let's see. Arian, I don't mean to be mean. This is not amp snobbery. Don't bother modifying a Bugera. It's just going to last as long as it lasts, and it's not worth putting any money into changing it. It's not a high quality thing. It doesn't mean it won't work for you. If it works for you, it works for you. But it's not something that's worth investing any money into beyond what you already have. Mr. AC Angus Young DC, yeah, surprisingly you were looking for an SG. Well, that reminds me. Be right back, it's in the other room. Isn't it nice when you don't have to choose? I would avoid Sanzeras. PRS makes some hellaciously good guitars, and they make some amps. Sadly, the amps are not all great quality. The Sanzeras and the 2-channel C and 2-channel H, I've been very underwhelmed by. But the David Grissom's are really good, and some of the earlier, like the one they did that was based on Jimmy's Fillmore amp, or Dwayne's Fillmore amp, that was a really good amp. So some of them are really good. Some of them I'm not impressed by. The Sanzeras, the SE line, Avoid. It's nothing against Doug Sewell. He knows what he's doing, but there's production versus design. Oh man, I love this one too. There's a reason that when the 335 became available, I had this and I had that Les Paul. and this stayed and the Les Paul left. Primarily because if I put the SG in my lap, it stays there. The Les Paul is tumped over. Can't see it, but the Les Paul would just bloop. SG is like an Art Deco telly. Yeah, that's right. I sang the Terrier song, Rob. I'm glad you caught that. Thank you, sir. I didn't enjoy that season they did a couple years ago. I thought the lightning had left the bottle. It was good to see them again, but it was kind of painful. I don't know. We're all getting old, but it just wasn't as fresh. It wasn't that funny to me. I have an odd sense of humor, though. I think the weirdest, best thing they ever did was the sausages. Sausages. Let's see. So my male Yorkie peed into the open back of a Trace Elliott Velochette. Horrible stack of noise. Hope it worked, Steve. Yeah. Urine, for all its not greatness, in the moment is not really that bad a thing. It's liquid with some proteins and stuff in it, and you just air stuff out and flush with isopropyl. You can also flush with distilled water, and let everything thoroughly evaporate. And a lot of times, as long as it hasn't been powered on with any contaminants or liquid in it, it'll come back to life. Hey, Flex FV, I can't tell you from here what changes to make to your divided by 13 with KT66s, what makes an amp unforgiving, and how to fix that amp is too tight. It's what's too tight for you or too unforgiving for you may be perfect for someone else, but I don't know which model that is. I would say at that price point with the divided by 13. First of all, maybe take it to a really good tech and see if it's working as designed and what they say about it. Second of all, at that price point, if that amp does not work for you, odds are it will work for someone else and can be sold for enough that you could pretty much go sideways into something else that would be a better fit for you without changing the thing which is inherently valuable in its stock form. I hope that makes sense. Hey, Richard Beardsley. I don't know a lot of great techs. I don't know a lot of techs in the United Kingdom, but one whom I really do like and respect is Roland Lumbey. He's in the Manchester area, and he does work for Johnny Marr and etc. And Blur, Graham from Blur, and all those guys, a lot of bands. But yeah, Roland Lumbey, Lumby, Roland as in Roland. And tell him I told him to stick it up his jumper. Tell him I sent you. Okay, still some... Besides euthanasia. You run for governor? I would have to have your app. Sounds like I don't want to have your app. But... But I would have to have it to give you further advice other than sometimes you got to flush things more than once. 60 cycle hum could also be caused by mismatched output tubes, not filtering out all the common mode cancellation, not using common mode cancellation to filter out as much of the ripple, which is going to be on the AC, which is feeding the AC, which is riding on the DC, which feeds the center tap of the output transformers. So I would try further cleaning and making sure the tubes weren't messed up in the process. And there's a reason I don't have a Yorkie. My lab would never even consider doing something like that in the house. Are you kidding? She'd be embarrassed for 6 months. Let's see. Hey, David Fisher. I don't remember the M15 Custom, the Magnatone M15 Custom. Is that one of those from the late 60s, early 70s that were kind of like the plastic enclosures, plastic combos? Those things are a bitch to work on. Magnatones can be tricky. Hey, is that you, Hal?
That's me.
Come on in. Come around through the hall. I got the other entry blocked.
You got a few amps in here.
Yeah, just drop yours off in there and come say hey to everyone. If it's one of those are a real pain to work on because everything's kind of a rat's nest. A lot of the Magnatones aren't that great. Yeah, late 50s plastic enclosure. They can sound really good, but they're really difficult to work on.
Move.
I'm gonna move. We got a Hal here. Come on in here, man.
Oh, you want me to sit down?
How much you play for people?
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna mute the vocal mic.
Hello, psionic audio files.
I'm gonna mute this mic and let everyone hear. See, it works when real players use it too. All right, where were we before we were so awesomely interrupted? You got a Morgan JS12. You got a trade. What should he look out for? AC. I don't know that you have anything to look out for because I don't know that model. I have had bad experience with their Princeton variation, which is they do like a 15 and a 30 watt version of that. And I have that document on the channel, but I've not had other Morgans, so I don't know whether they have problems across their entire line or just that one model, or whether they had problems and then resolved it. Hopefully that's the case. I don't come into this, I never wake up in the morning thinking, what company can I shit on? Who can I, make look bad? I just report on what it is. And that Morgan, they had capacitors that were not rated for the voltage present. They had spaghetti hidden beneath the board that made all the crosstalk and noise floor be high. It is what it is. And I did not make that happen. And I did not set out to get anyone. I much prefer when I could say, hey, this top hat, hey, this Sir, hey, this Friedman, hey, this Swart, hey, this old 70s Fender that you can pick up for $700. They're great. I like that. I want to be able to say, this is a real good thing, you should get it. But until I have more experience with Morgans, I cannot recommend Morgans because I have found that same problem with the underrated voltage on the caps in multiple versions of that same model. So I'm unfamiliar with the Victory Sheriff. I've only tried the Duchess and one other model, and I don't think that the owners were using the effects loops, so I just verified that they were working. I didn't really test it. A lot of effects loops are terrible out there. I'm sorry. Thank you, Richard Beardsley. I appreciate that. Hey, Sergeant Grinch. Is 20 watts a good first tube amp? Hell yeah. I mean, I wish I had that for my first good tube amp. That's fantastic. 20 watts is just big enough to gig with on modern stages, but it's low enough that you can actually use it at home. It's got a good master volume in the Friedman. And the nice thing about 20 watt amps typically is if the output tubes fail, you're not looking at $200, in your case, 200 pounds to get a new set. You can just spend 60, 80 pounds. So yeah, I think your grandson should be thrilled. Yusuf, I don't have any thoughts of the new Friedman Plexi because I've not seen inside one or heard one. I can probably be safe in going out on a limb and saying it's going to be great based on everything else that Dave has done that I've been in. I don't think he's going to like, doop-a-doop-a-doo, I forgot how to amp. It's going to be a continuation of goodness. I don't know whether it's his take on the Plexi is going to be the take that I would want, but I imagine it will be pleasing to almost everyone. And if it's pleasing to you, unless he forgot how to amp in the last 36 hours, it's probably great. But I've not tried it. I don't think that's a good idea, the Panda. If you're going to get that complicated with the 5F6A, Cascade you don't want. Stay away from the Cascade option in a 5F6A because other changes have to be made for that circuit to be stable. If you really want to go down that route, look at the videos I have up on the Randy Rhoads Marshall. I've got I think 3 videos on the Randy Rhoads with the cascaded stuff and how they did it versus how it should have been done and how it was when it left here. If you can't get a good sound from a 5F6A without cascading, then the 5F6A is not the amp for you. And I would not modify the 5F6A. I would just get a good quality ABY box, and there you go. That channel or both channels. And there you go. That's what people need. So don't sound to be. I'm not being dismissive of new ideas, but some of these ideas I've had, and I've learned the painful way why simple is good. You got a 5F11 clone, 600 millivolts of DC on the high input. Are the grid stoppers mounted on the board versus on the tubes? On the jacks? A lot of those Tweeds would have the grid stoppers mounted on the board, and there's a plate stuff to the left and cathode to the right, and the board just gets funky. In every case like that, if the client wants it all kept original as possible, I will just remove all the resistors and the wires and soak the hell out of everything in ISO, then put it all back. But in general, like you would see on that Champ from the other day, that 75 Champ, which had the same issue, I remove all the stuff off the board and I put the grid stoppers on the input jacks like every other Fender made after 62, and run a wire from there to the grid of the tube and takes all that out of the question. Sometimes you'll have that due to a bad resistor. It's rare, but it can happen, and it can be one of the 2 or 3 grid stoppers that do that. I say that because some of the Fender models at that era had 3 grid stoppers, because they're actually giving different voltage drops for the 3 channels with 3 different gain increases, gain levels. So you're gonna have some variation of 68K or 100K resistors in there, and then the 1 meg to ground. Any one of those can go bad and cause that, because that 1 meg is the grid leak by a ground reference for that tube, and if that tube doesn't have a steady reference to ground, it cannot bias itself well, and voltage can appear on the grid. In theory, that should go away when you plug into the channel, because then your guitar volume pot is run in parallel with that 1 meg, but it can still be a bad resistor. But usually it's just in the board. Hey, double chin mask. There's nothing wrong with something being made in China versus made in the United States. Stuff made in China can be as good or better. Depends on what the person speccing out the work is willing to pay for it. I'm live streaming all this to you in 1028. I could do 4K, but I'm just doing 1028 because it doesn't have as much of a lag. And Apple devices made in China. This phone's probably made in China. All these things that I'm talking to you through to maintain high quality stuff to you. A lot of this is made in China. It's just not cheap. It's not the cheapest possible version of this thing. This is a MacBook, not a Chinese copy of a MacBook. It is a Camlink, what do you call it? Camera adapter versus a $20 one. So I don't think there's going to be any difference between a PV Classic 30, because it wasn't, well, the ones built in Meridian weren't any damn good either as far as the build quality. It's a good sounding circuit, poorly built. The old Meridian ones, nothing was really holding the chassis to the cabinet, and the wobble and get loose. And then they tried to attach it with L brackets, and the tubes always got abused because things would hit the tubes, and it was never done right. If they have done it less expensively, that's not a bad thing. But the AC-15 C1 and AC-30 C2, I think those are made in Vietnam. Maybe they're made in China. I don't remember. Those are fantastic amps, and a lot of stuff that's not made in China in that same price range are bad. So politically, there are very valid reasons to not be thrilled with the Chinese government. I'm not saying yay the Chinese government. I am saying that as a reality of economics these days, many products are made in China, and that does not automatically make it mean it's a bad thing. And there are companies that have sweatshops, and there are companies that run ethical factories. And it's on us to make sure that, say Apple or Nike has ethical companies doing their work for them, and not sweatshops and child labor and all that. So it's tricky. But the issue with China is not because the Chinese cannot do something excellently. The issue is that a lot of American and European companies don't want to pay the Chinese to do the good version. They want to get the cheapest version. And China will happily make you the cheapest version of something. And here we are. I'm sorry, that's my economics lesson for the day. I don't know if I'm the right person to talk about that, but yeah, it is what it is, and it is what it ain't. Let's see. Marshall Super Bass recently got his attention and experience. Yeah, I've got experience with super basses. They're fantastic thing. Yeah, it's got a shared cathode on the V1. There's no disadvantage. The super bass is a fantastic thing. It was about 4 or 5 components change makes it into a super lead. It is a good circuit, and if you want to hear someone using it today very well, the guy from Tool does a fantastic job. Adam Jones, his Super Bass, I think is his primary app. It's a big, clean beast. Likes treble boosters. Hey, David, I keep a lot of notes. I'm not sure that all of them are legible to anyone else. I've got like 10 of these things. This one's less full. Was this? I don't. Let's see. Some of them are planning construction for when I'm going to do something in an app. Hey, I need to make a circuit happen in an app. How can I make this happen? Here I was thinking of 2 different ways to do the same thing on a 3-terminal terminal strip. This one's a new one. I've got my other ones over there out of reach, but they're all jam-packed with ideas and tracing out stuff that comes in. I don't remember what amp this was. Sometimes I'll write down what the amp was if it's important. I'll get an amp in that's rare and there's no schematic of, and I'll grab that, or let's see. Here I've got V7, V9, V8, V1, V2. I've got 1 and 3, 6, 8. So I've got the plate and cathode of each tube, and I've got voltage measurements. And I'm like, are these low? I think these might be low. These should be low. So I can. If I'm measuring all the voltages in an amp, I can't remember all those numbers, so I write them down. But I've got some detailed stuff. I've got some neater stuff here. This was a circuit I was designing for someone, a way to implement different changes, gain stages and tonal voicings and stuff. Here's another one. Here's where I was planning a new board layout for something, using eyelets or turrets. It's not exactly Da Vinci's notes, but it's not backwards, so. And I like grid paper because it almost lets me draw schematics properly, though I cheat on how I draw the tube symbols because I'm lazy. But they're for me. I don't need to draw all the little grid markings and plate markings cathode. I know what I mean by the circle with 3 an upper point, that's a plate, the bottom point, that's a cathode, and the thing on the side, that's a semicircle with 3 dots. That's my triode in my circuits. Hey, Rob F. I have no experience with the Friat power station. I think it's it does more than I know because I've not looked into it. I know that it takes a signal and attenuates it, but I think it's got like effects loops, and then it has a power amp where you can run out and be a power amp for wet, wet, dry, and all that stuff. I've not really looked into it. I've not looked into the attenuation market that much in the last 10 years, because if I needed to know that, I'd call Steve Friat, or I'd call Dave Friedman or John Suhr and say, hey, I got a client who wants to do this. What's the best way to do this without blowing things up? Because they're doing more LA kind of things, and probably some guys in Nashville too. But Memphis, people aren't really doing that. They're just saying, I got a deluxe reverb and it's on 4, and I got a mic on it and it sounds like this, which is what I just did. And for, if I were to go outside, you'd hear that, but it's not going to be deafening because it's a deluxe reverb on 4. It sounds pretty damn awesome, but it's not a 100-watt Marshall. Let's see. Hey, Vinicius, you're in Greece this time. Very nice. Yeah, Chris R., I think we get more voltage buildup on the boards here in the southeast, and probably along the East Coast, than you're going to get in the north east, or you're going to get in the southwest. Certainly, I'm not sure about the northwest, but yeah, we get a lot of humidity here. Not New Orleans or Houston levels, but we get the next what here. So there's us, There's New Orleans, there's Houston, there's Lethal. So we're right there, just below those top three. I have no thoughts on the Mesa Triple Crown other than it says Mesa, so you have been warned. Hey, John Kolhoff. Back in the day, 7025 was a 12x7 that was just sorted for the lowest noise in microphonics, and you could pretty much trust that. Today, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I will say that Electro-Harmonix has been doing it right. I find that the Electro-Harmonix 12x7s, the ones with the yellow print, are pretty much garbage, but the Electro-Harmonix 7025s, which have a silver print, have been uniformly good for me. I think maybe they're just making the same tube, and all the good ones get printed with silver labels, silver lettering, and called a 7025 and marked up, and all the crappy ones get a yellow 12x7 marking, and are just stuck on the market to be noisy and unreliable and fail and have heater issues. Making the tone knob wah effect more pronounced, a la Roy. I don't know if I'm the person to demonstrate this. I'm terrible at that kind of thing. And Hal left, but yeah, you want to have the right taper pot. Let me make sure the stuff's off. So this is a low torque pot. It's 250K, and it's about a 30% taper. And I've got a 47 nanofarad cap there. And I can't do that thing. I've got clients who can. That's why I have this set up that way. And when they play this, it does that. When I play it, it sounds like you just heard. Or kind of heard, because I didn't have the mic on for that. But anyway, that's pretty much it. That's what was in Roy's. Now, Roy had magical pickups, and Roy was magical. But the correct pot, the correct cap, and then the correct player, and then you get it. Hey, Lloyd, no, I don't think valve rectification is necessary at all. I think it's just asking for one more thing to fail, one more thing to generate heat, one more thing to need current from the power transformer. In my own new designs, I don't use valve transformers. I use solid-state replicas of that. And if anyone wants to know a good example of that, look to the Vox AC 15 and 30 custom series, where they have solid-state rectification of tube rectifiers, and you have the sag and the voltage drop and all that, but you don't have the heat and the current and one more thing to go wrong, or the cost. And people are like, hey, how do I put a rectifier tube in here? Please don't. Please don't. You'd have to change out the power transformer. You have to do a whole bunch of stuff, and you end up right back where you started. Let's see. I wish I'd seen your question about Roy's tone thing before Hal got here, Mike. Sorry about that. Let's see. Ward Ackerman, I'm not sure. I'm not a big fan of the YGM3. But yeah, if the transformers work for $200, you could either rebuild it as it was, or you could make a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, the circuit itself is kind of just a bigger 5E3 Tweed Deluxe that they went sideways on. You can easily make it into something fantastic. As far as the size and the cabinet, it's just a lot of the construction details on that I've not been a fan of. Yo, B, Mr. Brad's here. All right, everyone, be on your best behavior. Brad's a real stickler for foul language. Let's see, getting through. Hey, Bambule, any tricks to tame the reverb on a Silverface? There are two things happening. There's the reverb level, which gets controlled by the reverb pot on the front panel. And there's the time of the reverb. If you mean the level, the pot's already there. If the issue is how long the reverb decay lasts, you need to change the tank. So you just get a tank with a shorter decay. I really like the medium decay that Mojo Tone sells. But beyond that, the reverb pot, level pot is already on the amp. Let's see. I think people are, all right, we're caught up where Hal was playing. That's cool. Mike Chandler asked, do I have an opinion on Lewis electric amps? I do. And I hate doing this. Like I said earlier, I don't like shitting on amp companies. But every Lewis electric I've had in has been so poorly built and so noisy and riddled with wires that were never soldered from the factory and bad chokes. In one case, an amp had a faulty choke, and the amp was sent to Lewis for repair 3 times because you could not play an F sharp on the damn thing. F sharp made the entire amp go crazy. And he sent it back and said, that's what old tweed amps do, just don't play F sharp. No, that's not what old tweed amps do. And you should be able to play any goddamn note you want on an amp you want. And I've got the damn amp from the owner, and like, hey, it's got a short in the winding on the choke. It's arcing, and it's happening on F sharp and multiples of that. I changed that out and gave it a sane bias, and was able to inform the owner that underneath all the components that were painted red was just a mixture of Vichy resistors, the R&Ds, and Mallory 150Ms that all been painted red so no one could steal the magic values. And all the magic values were straight out of the Fender schematic. There was nothing original on those. Another client had a Lewis electric amp that was the Keith Richards model that was supposed to be some super duper thing. It was a tweed bassman that had been badly cascaded, like we talked about earlier, to the JCM 800 input. Only it wasn't stable because it didn't have a grid reference for the ground at the moment you switched, and it was oscillating because you can't just cascade without making other changes in gain. It was amateur hour at pro level prices with red paint on everything and a big attitude because he I don't know whether he sold them or whether he just conned Joe Walsh and a few other players into taking pictures with him, and then was able to sell them for a shitload. But they're bad kit builds with some red paint on them and a lot of marketing. So there. Any attorneys watching? Bring it. I can back all this shit up, and I've got attorneys too. Let's see. Captain Fineweather, your advice on AC30 CC2. All right, CC2 is different than the C series. Jumper, the 330K resistor had the normal channel volume. Yes, that applies to the custom. Change the 220 picofarad bright cap to 100 picofarad cap. No, on the custom it already has 100 picofarad in the correct place. You don't need to do that. Put a 68 picofarad cap across legs 1 and 2 the normal volume pot. No. On the you don't need to put the 68 picofarad cap in or change. There's no 220 picofarad bright cap on the normal volume. So the only thing you need to do on the AC15C that's comparable to the CC is jumper that 330K. All the other stuff has already been done. The AC15C series, the custom series, has already had all these fixes done, opposed to the earlier custom classic series. Very confusing model names for those 2 subsequent periods of Vox. Michael Jennings, 6CA7 and EL34s are totally interchangeable. The 6CA7s are just American versions of the EL34. Barley. Barely barley, hops and barley, very nice. Now I want beer and soup. Kidding, I never want soup. Brian, that is an impossible question to answer. I've been thinking about buying a blonde or black-faced bassman, which is fun to say. Is it worth spending the extra money for the blonde? It depends. What do you want to sound like? What do you expect it to sound like? In a perfect world, we'd all have a 58, a 62, and a 64. But this world, sadly, for me at least, has been imperfect. And the player who's going to be happy with one is going to be less happy with the other. No model of Fender changed as much in a 10-year period as the Bassman did. So with any of these, go play them. See which one makes your toes curl up. You may be like, oh my God, that 60 is the killer. No. The 60, that early 63 with the blonde and the white knobs, that's just where it's at. I just see myself getting a reverb pedal with that and being done. And other people are going to be like, man, I don't know, smoking, that 64 is the way to go. And they're all right. And the others are not wrong. So before you spend money on those things, go play it yourself. Slipped my mind. Not now, Murray. Thank you, Vincent G. And PFG. What speakers would I recommend for 65 Super Reverb if you're looking for SRV tone? First of all, forget about SRV tone. I have played his guitar. I sounded like myself. I saw Brian Setzer and Stevie Ray play together in 89 or 90. And at the end of Stevie Ray's set, Brian Setzer came out and joined him. And they swapped rigs. And so Stevie Ray's playing the Gretsch to the blonde bassman. And Setzer's playing the number one Strat, the SRV Strat, through Stevie Ray's rig. Brian still sounded like Brian. Stevie still sounded like Stevie. It's not the rig. They both sounded slightly more like themselves to their own rig, but the personality, the tone, the change. It's a tough thing for someone in my position when I fix amps and build circuits and stuff, because, tone is in the hands, none of that matters. Yeah, it matters. If you can't play Metallica into a 63 Deluxe, and you can't. Jim Hall couldn't get a sound worth shit out of a Bogner Uberschall. You have gear which supports what the hands are trying to do, and you have gear which impedes what the hands are trying to do, and you have to have it all working together. So when I fix the amps, when I fix the gear, when I design things, I'm designing things to work with those hands, to get out of the way of those hands. And show me a guy who can make a wah sound out of his hands. There are limits to what hands can do. But if you were to have a 65 Super Reverb and you had really good condition CTS 10-inch Alnico speakers, reconed if necessary, and Stevie Ray had not died, and he came over to your house for a weekend, for a barbecue, and he walked in your amp room, and he played your Super Reverb with those 10-inch Alnico speakers, you, hearing that, would say, God damn, that sounds just like him. That sounds awesome. And if you have those 10-inch Alnico original CTS speakers, reconed if necessary, you will probably be very, very happy as well. But you won't sound like Stevie Ray. Nice recommendation there for Roland Lumby. Yeah, Roland's fantastic, and he knows his stuff, and his wife is lovely as well. Let's see. Everyone's saying hi to Hal. That's good. I think we are coming up on the next break. So when we come back, we're going to get to JDS's question about his Princeton 65 reissue, because my teeth are floating. And we will come back in a few minutes, and we will resume this. You guys have been here before. You know how it works. 7 minutes starting All righty. And we're back. And we're back. Yeah, we'll talk about the AC10C1 in a little bit. It's an odd circuit. It's got some flaws. I might be getting in touch with someone from Vox to talk about that. But anyway, before I get back to the questions, and I've not forgotten you, JDS, where we're at, and I see Brian Gorski with the super chat. I appreciate that. We'll get there, Brian Gorski. But I want to give you guys or ask some opinions. I have arranged to try out, I got 30 days to try out, a Line 6 HX stomp. And my thought was, if the noise level is acceptable to me, because I'm finicky about digital noise levels, that it would be a good device to have to give. I've got a little flashback here. Give me reverb, delay, tremolo, all these options for amps that don't have them. You know, I've got this deluxe here that doesn't have reverb, for instance. I don't have any reverb pedals. I do. I've got a Flint over there. I just didn't hook it up. But instead of having a Flint and having this is an old flashback here that you heard that little slap. Just have something where I have my analog pedals, and for working on amps, if I want to say, hey, this is what it sounds like with a plate reverb, call that up. And for other things, like I play bass. I don't have a bass amp. That'd be nice to be a standalone bass amp. Or maybe for things like this, if I want to show you an idea, I could just call up a model of the amp and just plug straight in via USB and not have anything happening in the room. Might be fun for me to have as well. But mostly, just to say, all right, I have actual analog gain pedals, because I can design those myself and tweak them as I want. And then just having some ability to get reverbs and delays and all that fun stuff and vibes and such. Be flexible with it. If I don't like it, and I have an open mind, but if I don't like it, if I find that the noise level's too high, or the feel is always off, or I don't have control of the parameters that I wish I had. Granted, I'm not spinning for a fractal. And I say that in a review video. You guys are all my subscribers, everyone here chatting, and I appreciate you for that. But let's just have a pool. How many posts will comment, another old guy who doesn't understand technology, blah, 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 blah. This old guy used to work for IBM. This old guy used to be an NT network admin guy back in the days when that was a new challenging thing to do. This old guy used to design websites, and this old guy used to design databases. When I tell the world whether I like it or not, this old guy will be using 4K video and high-def audio and plugins and video editing software and Illustrator and Photoshop to do the thumbnails and all this stuff. Every time I say this bit of technology is not as good as it should be, or this thing is too noisy, I get dismissed because I have gray hair, and I live at a very high technical level where an HX stomp is literal child's play. I hope that I have fun with it, and I hope that it's useful, even if 90% of the time I just dump on a little slap back and a plate reverb and say, hey, it's Jimmy Page. I don't want to sound like most of the guys out there who use the HX stomp, because I find it all goes kind of fusion, kind of soft, and I think that's more their programming than the inherent character of the device. We shall find out. Let's get back to the questions. JDS has tremolo on his Princeton 65 reissue. It's too fast even on one. You don't change the resistors typically. The tremolo in that's got to have a 3 meg resistor in series with 100K for the variable part, and then it has a 1 meg and it has a 1 meg. And it's going to have a 2 nanofarad cap followed by a 10 nanofarad cap, then a 10 nanofarad cap. So if you look at it here, so here's the plate. It's got a 20 nanofarad cap, which goes to a 3 meg pot with 100K to ground. The 100K sets your fastest speed. The 3 meg sets your lowest speed. Then it's got a 10 nanofarad cap, which goes to 1 meg to ground. Then it's got a 10 nanofarad cap that goes to 1 meg to ground, and that point also goes to the grid of the tube that makes it oscillate. It does the entire loop. If it's too slow, either your 3 meg pot does not actually measure 3 meg, and that can happen. You can have a pot that just doesn't, whatever, measure correct, or your 22 nanofarad is faulty, or one of your 10 nanofarads is faulty, or you just don't like the minimum speed. You wish it were slower, in which case you can change that first. So it's 20 nanofarad, then 10 nanofarad, then 10 nanofarad. You can change that first 10 nanofarad cap, the one in the middle, to a 22 nanofarad by putting another 10 nanofarad across it, or you can also put caps across the first one. So you can increase the cap values, typically giving the result you want, because the 1 megs, you don't really want to change those for reasons I don't have time to get into. And the 3 meg, you can't find a 5 meg reverse audio pot, but you can measure your 3 meg reverse audio pot that's in there and say, oh, this thing only measures 1.8 meg. It's a defective pot. That could be the issue. I appreciate the super chat. It says, looks like your super chat didn't send with question. I will look for your question. Or did I already get to your question? If I skip your question, I do not mean to, especially since you gave a super chat. Post it again if it was previous to this. I'm scrolling up. Oh no. Okay, you did ask that. That was the basement question. Okay. Dave is saying the post-phase inverter master volume in the Plexi is new and just about as good as a power station. He's told me what he's doing there. I tried it myself, and it did not work for me as advertised, but I'm not 1,000% sure that I implemented it the way he does, because he was a little bit vague about it. It's possible that I did, and it's just not my favorite. There are about 4 different ways to wire up the same circuit, pretty much, and they have different adherence. And I found that some of them work better in some amps than others. I find that if what I tried that Dave said, which is probably what he's doing, does sound good. It's just not my preference. It's all about how the present circuit collapses or doesn't, or at what point it collapses. But yeah, by the time the master volume turns down enough that the presence doesn't do what you want, that's enough attenuation that most attenuators would also introduce artifacts. In general, you don't want to be making your 100-watt amp bedroom level. The goal is just to be able to use it in a live setting without getting fired off the stage. If you need a quiet amp, this 22-watt deluxe, as I showed earlier, can be quiet for home use, and that's using it clean. Attenuating a 100-watt amp to get down to that same level, that's asking too much. Hey David, if I'm doing a prototype, I'll typically do turret board, because with turret boards, I have a lot of control, and the turret's not going to tear up, and I don't have to worry about a backing board or drip through like an eyelet board. It's a little bit tricky. You got to remove it to do some things. But once I get it locked in, I prefer to do high quality PCB, because one of the first things I have to do if I'm building something with eyelet or turret is I got to run all the wire runs everywhere. And PCB, I have all that baked in, and I can say, well, hey, it's real critical that these wires are run together like this here, with about this distance between them. I can lock that into a trace, whereas with the wire, if it moves, you can get instability and stuff. My goal of longevity, easy maintenance would include PCB, even if cost is not an issue, because a high-quality PCB that is designed for easy, good service can be done. Large pads, slightly over large holes for the component leads, through-hole plated, thick, both in terms of the board material and the amount of copper on both sides. You can choose how much copper goes on a board. So if you're trying to make it good, PCB can do that for you. It's just most people who are doing PCB are trying to make it cheap. And we're back to the economics discussion. Let's see. What are the conditions that may make you choose to use a choke for a black face screen node rather than a resistor of similar resistance? It's not just the voltage drop. It's the amount of filtering. That if you are using a resistor there instead of a choke, you need to use more filtering because the choke also removes ripple more than a resistor will. So it's not a matter of, hey, this thing measures 260 ohms, I'll just put in a resistor. If you do that, you're going to have the same voltage drop, but you're not going to have the same reduction in ripple from the previous stage. So notice that a choke that may measure X DCR is rarely replaced by a resistor of that same value. They'll be replaced by a larger value resistor. Power supply design can be tricky. There are literally books on the subject, and I won't try to sum them up here in the context of this chat. But again, I would send you to thevalvewizard.co.uk. He has a fantastic book exactly on this, and he has some chapters on for free on his website on this subject. In general, for a larger wattage amp, say from 15 watts up, I prefer to use a choke. For smaller wattage things, and 15 watts is kind of the dividing line. You can go either way. Like a 5E3 Deluxe is fine with a resistor. A Princeton is fine with a resistor in place of a choke. For the Deluxe Reverb, sounds better with a choke. And there are some other things you can do to improve a Princeton working around that resistor. I have no thoughts on Splon, William De Silva. I have not had a Splon amp in. I have other tech friends who have said some not very nice things about them, so I would have reservations about recommending them, but I cannot warn you about them specifically from my experience, and I cannot recommend them from my experience. I can tell you that they exist, and I hope that they are fantastic, and that everyone who has one has nothing but joy and longevity from them, but I don't know that. Hey, Lone Wolf McQuaid. No, you're the best, man. It's all you, man. It's all you. After a dead transformer, what else could be damaged when using the wrong fuse on a 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue? Well, you could burn out if you had a heater fuse, you could have charring on your tube sockets. It's not uncommon between pins 3 and 2. You could easily have burnt out cathode resistors as a result of that. The screen grid resistors like to char on that model. If they're board mounted, it's easy to move those off the board to the output tube sockets like they did in the 60s. Typically, it's either going to be the things I just listed, or it's going to be the power transformer. And that's one of the reasons you should always use the correct fuse on a 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue or any other amp. Adam's Super Bass is modded Super Lead spec. Cool. Okay. I thought it was partially there. I thought it was nudged in that direction, but not fully there. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. Do I think a Fender Bassman 10, 2-channel, 50-watt, 4x10 guitar combo, okay, that's a reverb category, is a good amp? It's okay. The Bassman 10 is the one with the interstage transformer, I believe, instead of a phase reverter. They're okay. They're very, very clean. If you're going after that really hypothetical pedal platform with almost no sonic footprint of its own, that's one of the closer things to it. but I would not seek them out. And I think if a 4x10, those combos with a 4x10, the speakers in those are not the great ones that you'd find in a 60 Super Reverb. There's a reason that you can finally usually get them pretty cheap. Personally, I would buy a deluxe reverb reissue over that. I think it has more personality and character, and with a few simple mods that I've shown on the channel that you can have any tech implement fairly cheaply, I think you have a better amp. But someone out there has that Bassman 10 and is doing wonderful things with it and loves it. So, good for them. Hey, Tube Guy. Yeah, the MSK is good series. Pretty much, it says you got an older Vox, like 70s, 80s, with a WEMA box cap. Pretty much, the only rule of thumb you need to worry about there with the various WEMA box cap series is polypropylene versus polyester. You want the polyesters for the Voxes to be more authentic, and the WEMAs don't call it polyester; they call it something else. I can't remember what they call it, but if you go to Mauser or DigiKey and you sort the WEMA box caps, you have a choice of polypropylene or the other one. It's the other one. The other one's the polyester series. But yeah, they're really good caps, and you cannot really go wrong with any of them. Sold a King of Tone and bought a yacht. My name is Elmer Fudd, millionaire. I own a mansion and a yacht. JM, if you want a little less gain in a Fender, go with a 5751. See what you like. Won't hurt anything. They're gonna sound slightly different from each other. The 5751 has got nominally 30% less gain, so 70% of the gain, which can be a good thing. It depends on gain staging. To get the same, basically what it's going to come down to on a Fender is that you will end up turning the channel volume up a little bit more to get to the same level. And if you have a Fender which has a bright cap, that means that bright cap's going to do a little bit less. Let's say it's a deluxe reverb and it still has the 47 picofarad bright cap. So if you're playing it on 2.5 with the 12x7 and you put in the 5751, human nature being what it is, you're going to turn it up to like 4 to get to the same output level because that's the sound that you like, and that's when the speaker and the pickups are interacting. Well, the bright cap's doing a lot less on 4 than it was doing on 2.5, so all of a sudden the amp's going to sound warmer, and you're going to say, well, that sounds great. I like the 5751. Or you could also have just kept the 12x7 at 2.5 and remove the bright cap. So you have to know what's causing the difference that you're hearing. The difference you're hearing is real, but it's rare for someone to say, all right, I'm playing this Fender Deluxe Reverb at 2.5 with a 12x7, I'm putting a 5751, and I'm not changing anything. I'm comparing that. Because if you compare that, you're going to say, well, that 5751 sucks. The 12x7 was so much better because louder is always better. Our ears like louder things. It's more exciting. It happens to me. It happens to Brad. Everyone who does this professionally knows this pitfall, knows this trap that's waiting for us, and we still step in it all the time because we're like, that sounds amazing. Oh, wait, it's just louder. So it's one of the reasons when you compare pedals or amps, you can't go by the volume setting, the knob settings, because pot tapers vary so much. Like if I were to have one deluxe reverb with the volume on 3 and the next deluxe reverb with the volume on 3, and wow, that one's so much better and livelier and awesomer. Well, no, one of them's got a 10% taper, one's got a 30% taper, and so the one with the 30% taper sounds more awesome on 3. But that doesn't mean that the amp's any different. The one that has a 10% taper, turn it from 3 to 4.5, and now you have apples to apples. Sebastian, I'm confused by the available 12x7s, low gain, higher gain, bigger ones with lots of gain, tend to be microphonic. It's a red balanced one. PET, that's right, they call it. My doorbell just rang. Hold on a second, Sebastian. Let me check, see who that is. Sorry, guys. That was UPS dropping off that 64 Super Reverb. So here's the thing. During the course of this stream, I've had a 65 Deluxe Reverb and a 64 Super Reverb dropped off. I should stream more often. Have you guys considered it? It's awesome. It's great. So sorry about that. There's too much bullshit on the internet about tubes. Higher gain can be more microphonic. Long plates can be more microphonic than short plates. And people are like, JJs are dark, and these are great, and these are bad, and new old stock is the way to go. I don't worry about all that. I worry primarily about, does it work? I make sure that if it's going to be in the cathode follower stage, that it is not a Russian tube of any type, only Chinese or Slovakian there. The long plates like this Sovtek LPS, I don't use in a preamp tube because they are very susceptible to microphonics, but they tend to be very good in phase inverters because phase inverters tend to be, well, most guitar amps have LTP, long tail pair phase inverters, which are almost unity gain. And then it's the client's budget. Some clients want to have it say mullered, and some clients are willing to pay crazy money for old tubes, some of which even work. Others just want something that works. And so, does it work? Does it sound good? Is it likely to last? So no Russian tubes as cathode followers. Is it the right tube for the location? So no long tailed, no long plate, no long plates in V1. Long plates are fantastic as phase inverters. Beyond that, it's almost winning the lottery these days just to get, if you have 6 preamp tubes in an amp, to get 6 good ones can be quite the accomplishment these days. So. Let's see. Scrolling down, talking about, yeah, Amp Guru wannabe snake oil assholes. You're right, Brad. Talking about Lewis Electric. Sorry, Lewis Electric. Don't want to bad talk Lois. She's great. Let's see here. Lonnie, I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but your 70s PV Classic is not digital. It's solid state, but it's not digital. Talking about beer recipes. I assume this is when I was doing the last intermission. Let's see. Greetings from Ukraine. Hey, Nazar. I think I can speak for everyone. We are very glad that you are here joining us from Ukraine. And you and all Ukraine's thoughts are in our thoughts. It's a terrible time. I'm glad that you're able to think about things like this in the middle of it. Already have an Origin 20, planning to purchase a Solo Dallas Schaefer. Okay. There's nothing wrong with the Solo Dallas thing. That was a replica of the wireless unit that Angus used on Back in Black, for those who don't know. I don't know if it's necessary. If you're looking on a budget, I don't think it would be worth doing. I think if you were to take your guitar and your Origin 20C, on the Origin you want to keep the master volume up as high as your neighbors will allow, or it'll clean up. I would not spend money on the SV20C either. I would look at if you really want to go down this road, I would look at getting, for what you do, some of the Friedmans in the same price range as the Marshall SV20 are much better quality amps that will get you the AC/DC sound. And then almost any mild gain pedal will take you over the edge. Let me give you a little preview. This is with a deluxe reverb, which is not an Angus amp. I'm going to turn off this mic because it blows out with the amp, and turn on the amp mic. But this is going to be a deluxe reverb, an SG, and a little bit of overdrive nudging it. And this overdrive slightly rolls off the bass and doesn't add a lot of clipping, but it really pushes even a deluxe reverb more towards AC/DC. So I'd say that the Friedman, better choice than the Marshall you have, or the SVT20, and worry about this solo Dallas thing later. In your financial situation, Angus would not have done that either. He would just make music, and almost any mild overdrive will do that. So here's that. A bit fuzzy. Well, I think I hit the mic pre a little hot. But I mean, it should still come through that the change, even a little bit of overdrive added to the deluxe, pushed it in that direction. And I think I probably clipped the mic pre a little bit because it was much louder than the telly that he was playing clean earlier. But that's the way to go. At this point, get the amp, learn the parts. I've never tried to play that solo, and I just realized that, hey, it goes up much higher, and I botched that part. But and I've never tried to play the entire song. I don't. That's not my thing. But in the overdrive pedal will push it just enough to get you where you need to be happy. Hey, Jack Smith, your AC10C1, it's got static. It could be a bad ground connection, could be a loose hardware. It's a cathode biased output circuit of that thing. You don't need to have anyone rebias it. I would not spend too much money on the AC10C1, but make sure the input jack is tight and everything. That's about what you need to do. That's about all you can do. But it doesn't have a lot of tubes. Hey, Jeff Parker. Right now, of the tubes that are on the market, currently I'm enjoying the Electroharmonix 7025 for that purpose. Which is the silver print one. I wouldn't go crazy, but it's a inexpensive, good quality tube, and it's sorted pretty well. Let's see. I've not worked on a Laney GH100L B-Bot. Sorry, don't have a lot of Laney stuff floating around here. So let's see. All right, so I'm trying to find the questions. There's a real appeal to plugging in analog and just playing. Well, that's what I do all the time. I just want to have a little flexibility for demos, and I don't want to have to go out and buy a bunch of reverb pedals and tremolo pedals and everything. I'll just one thing. I'll do all that stuff as necessary. 90% of the stuff on the channel is still going to stay just guitar straight into amp, but people want to know how amps take pedals and all that stuff. And, you know, it makes sense for me to have that in my arsenal, I think, if it works. Let's see. Yeah, I've already looked at all the documentation on the Helix stuff. The biggest thing seems to be the auto impedance or first impedance or setting the impedance. I'll be going through all that. If when I get the damn thing, I'll be learning it in a video for everyone, for people to follow along. It seems like an odd thing to model some of the hum and bias settings in those amps for people, because it's just like, if you give people the opportunity to make something sound bad, they will. Let's see. All right, people giving, and Nazar is looking at Taman prices. Nazar, remember that if you want to sound like AC/DC, you don't have to have a Marshall. I don't know what Taman's prices would be, but I would think that the Vox AC15 C1 would also do you very well for AC/DC stuff. Look on my channel for a video called Tone Hang with Steve, and you'll see what I'm talking about. There's not a huge difference between the output section of that and a JTM45. Hey, Mark. Yeah, I don't have any opinion on Rev because I've not played one and I've not had one in front of me. I watched that stream on Keith's channel to see what the guy from Rev was like, but I don't have any opinion other than Sean Tubbs makes them sound really good, and I don't think Sean Tubbs would be in business with them if they weren't actually good in the room. I don't think it's a thing where he's getting paid and making it sound good for the rest of us. I think he actually believes in it. But I don't have an opinion of my own until I have an opinion. So I look forward to forming one at some point. Let's see. All right, we're to the point where the amp arrived at the door. Thank you, Fletch's40, about the high watt video. Yeah. Yesterday's video on that tube killer is doing really well. I should probably just not upload anything for a couple of days, let that thing see how many views it gets. I'm still not really sure about what the right amount of time between videos to wait would be. There's probably some ideal thing where it lets one really get all the attention as opposed to like a video a day and everyone gets like 4,000 views. Maybe some of them would get 16,000 views if I didn't release something the next day. It's hard to think about all that stuff. I don't have a marketing department. Let's see. I love that you guys are talking to each other. I love that this is a group that sees each other a couple of times a month and gets to know each other, but it can make it hard to find questions. But Victor here is one of the few who actually reads the description where I ask if you could put the question mark so I can see the questions better. So thank you, Victor, and aloha and mahalo. With all the power tube voltage issues with Pro Juniors, making the amp cathode bias option worth doing? No, don't make any changes to a Pro Junior. If it's working, sell it. If it's not working, see how heavy it is, then you'll know which doors in the house it'll reliably keep open. They're bad amps. They sound good when they're working, but they're built in such a way to guarantee that they won't work for long. It's frustrating because the people who buy the Pro Juniors don't have a lot of excess money typically, so it's a big investment, and then it craps out on them because it's built not to last. It's one thing if something just doesn't last as long as something which is really high quality, but when something specifically is built to be as cheap as possible, knowing that will make that thing fail, knowing that there's no support for the pots, knowing that the jacks won't hold up, knowing that the tube sockets will burn, it pisses me off because you're taking advantage of people who cannot afford to be taken advantage of. It's not like charging extra for a Bugatti to have this kind of exotic wood versus that kind of exotic wood. It's like, will this knob work in 3 years? I don't have any opinion about Milkman amps because I've not tried them. I know they've got a lot of solid state Class D stuff, and they've got some tube stuff, and I have not followed them enough to know which models are which. I can't believe we actually are caught up current. Wow. All right. So we got 14 minutes. I can kind of relax now. Did we ever get a final video on the 50 watt high watt? We've not gotten on the final video yet. I've got to put it in the cabinet. The construction of that combo. This is the 86 high watt made in Modesto, California, not the 6970 real one. The quality of that combo is so bad. So you've got this big heavy chassis, and that chassis has 6 screws which hold a piece of wood about that thick on top. So far so good. So that top piece of wood slides into the top of the combo and then is screwed into the top of the combo by just 2 screws. And so the entire weight is being held in place by just 2 screws. It's really rinky-dink and just an insult. I don't know why they didn't just put 6 holes in the top of the combo cabinet and have you slide the chassis in and have it screw down into the cabinet itself. But no, it's on a daughter board, which is held on by 6 screws, but that entire thing is supported to the top of the chassis cabinet with just 2, and they're like drywall screws. So I don't like it at all, the way it's built. And I'll be showing that. And I have not tested the reverb circuit yet or the speaker it came with. That'll probably be tomorrow, and it will get a final video. But yesterday, I spent some time on this twin and finishing up lots of little things. Actually, I spent yesterday morning installing the heater balance resistors in that 86 high watt, and that buzz is gone. So it sounds better than it probably ever has. And it will get a final video. And then I've had so many amps coming in and just paperwork and amps taking to be shipped. And sometimes I like to hang out with my wife. I think we're going to walk over to a place that does New Orleans food tonight. Sit out on the porch, have a beer, and eat a po' boy if the storms don't blow us away first. Let's see. Rob F., I'd be interested in that. If one of us purchased a new amp that I've yet to work on, would I like to have it shipped to me first so I can review it for the channel? I'd be interested in that if the person can afford that because shipping can add up. And I'd want to make sure that it was someone was okay with knowing that this thing that they just bought might get shat upon. And the other issue is I don't want anyone to do that unsolicited, because I've had people send me stuff in the mail that I never asked for, including stuff going to old addresses. So on a case-by-case basis, I'd be interested, but not as a blanket invitation. Brad's Guitar Garage, what's a po' boy? It's a poor boy. Po stands for poor. Poor boy, it's a sandwich originates in New Orleans, and the rest of the world calls them subs or grinders, and they're not the same thing at all. It's a particular kind of French bread. It's about this long, and a po' boy is usually a third of that loaf. It comes from the real ones come from one bakery in New Orleans, and you can get all kinds of stuff on there. You can you want to you can get fried oysters. You can get fried shrimp. You can get when in season soft shell crab. I like the debris, which is little snippings of roast beef and gravy and cheddar cheese. You can get it dressed, which is going to be lettuce, tomato, and mayo. You can add some remoulade or some hot sauce to it. It's one of the best things in the world, and you can't get it too many places, but you can get them reliably here because we're close enough to New Orleans, and the place that we go even gets the bread from the correct place in New Orleans. And if you come to the States, like you've been threatening to, and you let me take you to New Orleans, I will show you, and they're fantastic. You know, soft shell crab po' boy is so great, but that's a June thing. Now I'm even hungrier. Now that I've said this, it's probably going to rain. We won't be able to go tonight. Now I've got my mouth set for one. Let's see. I don't have any thoughts on buying old Russian tubes because I don't like taking financial risks on things which are, most of them are going to be bad. I let the tube vendors buy that stuff and sort it out and sell me the ones that pass their tests. T777. Me, I'm not doing a run of amps based on that deluxe, but I have the secrets of that deluxe. They're not that secret, but I'll discuss those later. Hey, Matthew Arnold. Yeah, I use Mogami. Is it 2924? Let's see if it says on here. Remember that the low impedance stuff, the low capacitance stuff, gives you microphonics. Has low capacitance, but has a high handling noise. So if I do this to some of those evidence audios, you hear it. You can hear me doing. You can hear this through the amp. Doesn't say on here. I think this is W2924, and I use primarily Neutrik plugs. The ones you see the most often are these silent plugs, but I'll also quite happily use Amphenol. Switchcraft are high quality, but they like to come undone. They'll unscrew themselves unless you take great steps. Amphenol and Neutrik plugs I prefer because they'll stay where you left them. And I love the silent plugs, and the Neutrik silent plugs are better designed, smaller, and a lot less expensive than the Switchcraft silent plugs. So for most humans, the 2924 and Belden and Canary have some comparable cables as well. You want a balance between low-ish capacitance, but no microphonics, no handling noise, because the really low capacitance stuff, unless you're running everything into a buffer, it's going to be a nightmare. Let's see. And also these things have a very sturdy jacket. Hey, Seagull 87. Towards the very beginning of today's chat, I discussed PRS amps. Some of them I think are good, and some of them are not. And I don't want to rehash that. But look at the first 20 minutes. Hey, John L. Speaker recommendation for 67 Princeton Reverb. Like I said earlier, it depends on your ideal sound. For most clients, I'd say if your ideal Fender clean sound is like Stevie Ray's Riviera Paradise, the G10C. If you want something that's going to be more in the Robin Ford, a little bit thicker, the ET10. Those are both good choices. And there's some other great choices on the market, but those are the ones that most of my clients have been happy with. And they're not expensive, and they sound great. Victor, nothing new on the Excalibur right now. I've got to find someone who can make the faceplates because it's frustrating as hell to have this amp that sounds so good and looks so good, and I can't finish the second one, let alone go forward. Let me look up that cable that I get real quick. Make sure I'm telling you guys the right thing. Let's see. window, this one, and let's see. I guess I could even put a link. Let's see, wire and cable. $25.24. Yeah. All right. So I called it $29.24, but it's $25.24. I'll give you a link to Tube Depot. It's not the only place that has it, but they've been very good to me over the years. I also get it from Redco. But that's a good baseline cable. And if you prefer Canary, you're not wrong. If you prefer Belden, that's fine too. But the basic premise is that it is a good quality cable that's not trying to be something fancier than necessary, and that's rugged, and everything about it justifies its existence. Is not silver stranded this and low surface blah 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 and you know all the stuff that some of the companies like to charge all kinds of crazy money for snake oil. There's no snake oil. It's just wire put together correctly to transmit audio signals. And when people talk about directional cables, I really wonder how their brains work if they don't understand what AC means. Anyway, Joe McGraw, laser engraving's part of it. I'm looking for someone who is called Laser It. It's a trickier thing, but if you can send me the information for that guy, info@sonicaudio.com. I appreciate that. I'll look into it. But it's not just laser engraving. It's a particular kind of printing setup for a particular material. I can't find someone who will do it in the quantities that I want. Anyway, I got you run. It is time for us to all go on with our days. And I'm going to go see if my world is indeed ending as Brad has predicted, or whether I'm going to walk to Po' Boy Paradise. I hope. Po' Boy Paradise. Yeah, you can get Neutrik connectors almost anywhere. Amphenol is also quite excellent. I hope you all have a good week. Hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for putting up with my pedal ramblings and all that fun stuff. And let me find the right buttons to push, because I always forget which buttons to push. And yeah. If you're running a buffer, you're not going to have the problems, Rob. Yeah, low impedance, low capacitance cables without a buffer. Yeah, it's you can hear footprints as you walk across the stage. Anyway, let's wrap this up. See you guys.